solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Do, Your Honor.
Please be seated.
Officer, I know it's tough because you guys have those big belts on, but if you could just try to maneuver that microphone as close to you as possible and try to speak into it because the acoustics are not great. Okay. Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Jeffrey Van Wie, V-A-N, capital W-I-E.
And officer, how are you employed?
The City of Kenosha Police Department.
How long have you been a police officer?
For 18 years.
Did you become involved in the investigation of a shooting involving a Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yes.
And how did you become involved in that case?
I was handed over evidence by Detectives Howard and Antoranium to process and actually secure into evidence.
And how did you go about obtaining that or starting doing that?
So Detectives Howard and Antoranium met me by the police station. From there, the evidence was brought into our evidence room in the police station, and it was turned over to me.
And was this on August 26th?
Yes.
Do you recall the time?
It was roughly 9 in the morning, maybe a little before 9 in the morning.
And do you know from where these items had come?
No.
So what is the very first thing you did?
First thing I did was I was given 2 rifle boxes, so I actually processed the rifles and took photos of them.
Now, do you have any special training to do this type of thing?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
I'm a certified evidence technician for the last 15 years.
And what does that mean?
That means that as far as crime scenes go, that I would, whenever any different kind of crime scene goes, or I would go respond to that scene and I would process that scene for evidence, searching for whether it's DNA or fingerprint evidence or blood evidence. Also just processing evidence. So like if a detective has an item that he needs processed for DNA, then I would actually take that and swab that correctly.
And how do you swab that correctly?
As far as the rifles went, I actually took 3 swabs from each rifle. The swabs I obtained were from the trigger, from the pistol grip, and then from the barrel has a guard around the barrel, so I swabbed the guard of that barrel because that's the most likely place if somebody's holding that weapon that their hand would be on that guard.
Why would you not, or why didn't you swab the actual barrel?
So when I was given these rifles to process, I was instructed to process them. There was at that time, for my knowledge, there was no reason to swab the barrel.
So you swab the areas where someone is most likely to actually grip or hold the weapon.
Correct.
And that generally would not be the barrel of a gun.
Correct.
So what did you do? What's the first weapon that you encountered?
It was a rifle box that was written. It had writing on it, said Kyle Rittenhouse.
So what did you do with that?
With that one, I opened the box up. I wound up taking the serial number down, the information out from the weapon, photographing it, and then swabbing it in those areas I just mentioned for DNA.
Did you take photos of them?
Yes, I did.
And then what is the next thing you did in processing this evidence?
That, once I finish with that, it gets secured up, and then so I tape up the box and it's all.
All right, so you weren't here obviously, but a couple days ago we had an evidence box and it was opened and it was taken out of there. So you would have at first sealed it up in that box. You were the first one to do that?
That's correct.
All right, and then you would put that into evidence?
Yes.
And then you would come back to the next thing?
Correct.
All right, so what's the next thing that you did?
Next was an additional rifle box which was labeled Dominic on it.
And what did you do with that?
The same process. So I wound up swabbing the same areas on that weapon for DNA, photographing it, and then securing it, taping up and securing it.
Now, I want to go back to the box that had Kyle Rittenhouse written on it. Did you ever look into you said there was a rifle. Was there anything else along with the rifle?
There was also a sight, or a scope, if you will, inside the box. It was not attached to the rifle.
Was there anything attached to the rifle?
A black sling.
And was there any ammunition or a magazine or anything like that?
Not in that box. There was a separate bag that had a magazine in there with live ammunition.
And did that have one or two magazines?
Had one.
And was there any markings on that box or bag?
I was informed by the detectives that was from the rifle belonging to Kyle Rittenhouse.
So what did you find when you looked at that magazine?
The magazine had live ammunition in it.
Do you know how much live ammunition was in that magazine?
The magazine itself was a 30 capacity for 30 rounds, and there were 22 live bullets in there, unfired bullets.
And were they all the same brand, or were they different brands?
They were all the same as far as the caliber goes, but there was multiple different brands inside there.
And what was the caliber of these?
There were 223s.
And did you take a DNA swab of that piece of evidence as well?
I did a swab of the actual magazine, so I took a swab off each side of the magazine, a DNA swab.
One swab on both, or one
swab on each side of the magazine.
Okay. And then did you package up the magazine and the live rounds?
So I wound up taking each unfired projectile out, and then in the order they came in, I secured them in boxes. So like the first unfired bullet that I ejected out of the magazine, I would put in a box and label it 1. The second one 2. So I did that for all 22 rounds, and I took photos of each one.
Took photos of each one?
Correct.
Did you do the same thing with the rifle that was labeled Dominic?
There was no ammunition with that, no magazine.
But you did the same process in terms of the DNA swabbing?
Of the actual rifle, yes.
And then what do you do once you take these swabs?
So the swabs I wound up securing. The swabs actually go in a little swab box, and I secure them in an envelope, something that can breathe, that's breathable, and then that gets taped up, and I secure those in a locker into evidence.
Was there any other evidence that was not related to these firearms that you packaged or logged that day?
There were a few other items that was handed, yes. There was some clothing, there was a cell phone, and then a backpack which contained some medical supplies.
Did you do anything with the information that you got off of the firearms?
So we do, with every firearm that we log into evidence, we have a form called an E-Trace form, and what that is we work with in conjunction with like the ATF as far as having a database and a record of every gun that we log into evidence. So with both of those rifles, I wound up contacting on the telephone an ATF agent who actually did a quick, what they call E-Trace form with me in order to log that into the database.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Let's examine. Good afternoon, officer.
Afternoon.
So on the 26th, you basically assist these two detectives, Howard and Antaramian, in terms of doing this swab. Is that right?
I did. They handed off the evidence to me,
Okay.
but I did the swabs by myself. Yes.
Understood. Well, and your report indicates that at KPD, evidence detective Antaramian advised he needed 2 rifles processed. Did he tell you, he being Detective Antaramian, the areas that he wanted swabbed by you?
He did not.
Who made that decision?
I did.
At that point, do you know anything about the case?
Not a whole lot, no.
Okay, so you mentioned that the trigger is swabbed, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I know we don't have the pistol or the firearms here, so I'm gonna. When you say the barrel guard, is that the area here where my left hand would be if I was holding it like this?
Correct. So the barrel of the gun has a plastic, if you would, guard around it, and that's the part that I swabbed.
Okay. And then the pistol grip, is that the area?
Right. That's where your hand, your palm would be. So if the trigger's here, the pistol grip is where your hand is holding onto.
Okay. So when the DNA swab is done initially, obviously you're looking for potentially forensic evidence on that gun, right?
Correct.
But you don't know the areas specifically that you're supposed to be looking at. True?
Unless I'm otherwise told, when I process whether it's a gun or a rifle, it's going to be typically the same areas that I would obtain swabs from. If there was something else for some other reason or rationale that I would have to do things differently, then I would do things differently. But normally to swab a rifle or a handgun, just about all our evidence people would choose the same areas.
Okay, and I'm not
Right.
I'm not questioning that. What I'm asking is, at some point, do you learn more information about this case?
I'm sorry, as far as...
I'll ask it to you this way. Did any detective come to you and ask you to do additional swabs on that firearm now that more information about what had happened was out there?
No, did not.
If somebody would have asked you to swab based on information they had, and they said to you, Officer Van, we would like to know if there's DNA on the actual barrel of that gun, could you have done that?
Absolutely.
And that wasn't done, was it?
No.
The firearm that you, I think you opened it that had it said Kyle Rittenhouse on it?
Correct.
Okay. There was a sight on that gun, is that right?
There was a sight. It was not mounted on it. It was in the box with it.
Okay. If you remember, and I'm going to use the wrong terminology, so I'm going to ask for your help. That sight didn't have a laser that projected out where, for example, if I was holding it, I could put a dot on your chest, correct?
Not to my knowledge, but I never actually messed with the sight at all. So I never turned it on. I never really viewed it at all. So.
Okay. And this testing was done the day after the shooting, right?
The 26th. So if the shooting was the 25th, then yes.
Okay. Thank you for your time, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Question?
Are you aware if the defense attorneys asked for further testing of the gun?
I was not informed of any other further testing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other question? You may step down, sir.
Thank you. State Officer Moretti.